Emma sat silently in the courtroom. The mahogany bench cooled beneath her fingertips. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by the sharp tap of the judge's gavel and the rustling of legal documents. Her heart pounded like a drum, but her face remained calm and ocean with a storm brewing beneath the surface. She wore a navy blue blazer that matched the seriousness of the occasion, her chestnut hair swept into a neat bun. Across the room, Daniel leaned back in his chair, too comfortable, too smug. His custom-tailored gray suit and gold watch gleamed beneath the courtroom lights like battle armor. But Emma didn't flinch. She had prepared for this day more than he could imagine. Daniel's lawyer passed him the divorce papers, and with a flourish, he signed. He barely looked up, only glancing toward Emma with a half-smile that dripped with condescension. To him, this was a final win, a symbolic closing of a chapter he believed he had authored and dominated. He had left Emma 2 years ago, thinking she would crumble. And for a while, she did, but not anymore. The judge cleared his throat, flipping to the financial section of Emma's disclosure. As he read aloud the assets Emma had declared her, majority ownership in a rising publishing house, a Manhattan loft, and a 7-figure bank account, Daniel's smirk cracked. His eyes darted from the papers to Emma, now hearing her name attached to accomplishments he had never imagined. Emma didn't blink. She didn't smile. She simply met his gaze with quiet, assertive power. The courtroom faded into a hushed silence, tension shifting like tectonic plates. This wasn't the end, for her it was the beginning. Daniel's jaw clenched as he leaned forward in his seat. No longer lounging like a man in control, his fingers twitched slightly, betraying his disbelief as the judge continued reading. Miss Emma Hartford, sole proprietor of Ember and Quill Publishing, net worth currently estimated at $3.2 million. The words echoed off the walls of the courtroom like thunder. Daniel blinked rapidly, as if trying to wake up from a bad dream. Emma's lawyer, Mr. Jameson, glanced at Daniel with a calm, almost pitiful expression, then turned to Emma and gave a subtle nod. Daniel had always assumed Emma was too soft, too dependent, too invisible to do anything remarkable on her own. Their marriage had been an uneven one, he, the financier with a fast lifestyle, and she, the once timid woman who quietly supported him, who cooked, cleaned, and waited up while he worked late. He never noticed how sharp her mind was, how often she scribbled in her notebook, or the long hours she spent reading and researching in their small home office. To him, Emma was background noiseful, quiet, disposable. Now, sitting across from her, watching her straighten her blazer and calmly sip from a bottle of water, he was seeing her for the first time. The courtroom lights seemed to catch her cheekbones differently now. There was something regal in her posture, something fierce in the stillness she carried. His stomach sank as the judge raised an eyebrow and said, "It seems this divorce benefits Mr. Hartford more than Miss Hartford, financially speaking. Is there any objection?" Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. Emma didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She had already won something far greater than money. She had reclaimed herself. Daniel sat frozen in his seat as the judge's words faded into the background. He no longer heard the scribble of the stenographer or the soft murmur of the court clerk. All he could see was his Emma, poised, radiant, and terrifyingly unfamiliar. She wasn't the woman he had walked away from 2 years ago. That woman had worn oversized sweaters, apologized too often, and spoke in a whisper even in her own home. This woman wore power like perfume, subtle but impossible to ignore. Emma hadn't always been this way. The transformation had been slow and painful. After Daniel left, the silence of their empty home nearly consumed her. At first, she cried for days, her heartbroken sobs echoing through every room. She questioned everything: her worth, her future, her sanity, but when she hit rock bottom, something inside her ignited. Emma began writing again, something she hadn't done since college. She dug up old manuscripts and short stories buried deep in her hard drive. She started editing for indie authors online to pay bills. Then, she launched her own small Ember and Quill out of sheer necessity. It was either rise or disappear. She rose. As the court recessed for a short break, Daniel slowly approached her, hands shoved in his pockets like a boy in trouble. "Emma, I didn't know," he said, his voice uncertain. She finally looked at him, her gaze cool and steady. "No," she said softly, "you never tried to." Daniel swallowed hard, suddenly realizing that the person he had underestimated wasn't just successful now. She was out of his reach. The hallway outside the courtroom was quiet except for the low hum of vending machines and the occasional shuffle of footsteps on polished tiles. Emma stepped away from Daniel without another word, her heels clicking confidently as she walked toward the window at the end of the corridor. She stared out over the city skyline, where sunlight pierced through gray clouds, like hope breaking through sorrow. This moment wasn't about revenge, was about liberation. For the first time in years, Emma felt the weight of someone else's expectations lift off her shoulders. Behind her, Daniel lingered. He was used to controlling conversations, rooms, people, but now he was left holding pieces of a story he thought he had authored. Emma's success shattered the narrative he had crafted, the one where he was the provider and she the dependent. Seeing her standing tall, her presence commanding the space, was like watching his reflection crack in a mirror. It was unnerving. He walked up behind her, almost cautiously. "So, this publishing company," he began, forcing lightness into his voice. "Was that something you always wanted to do?" Emma didn't turn around. "It was something I always knew I could do. I just needed to remember it." Her voice was calm but carried a quiet power that filled the corridor. "You walked away before I had the chance to show you." Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temple. "I thought I was doing us both a favor." "You were," she replied, finally turning to face him. "You just didn't know it at the time." For the first time in their long, tangled relationship, Daniel didn't know what to say, and Emma didn't wait for him to figure it out. Later that evening, Emma sat in her loft apartment, overlooking the city lights. The silence was different now, no longer filled with sorrow, but peace. Her apartment, decorated with warm amber tones and shelves lined with books, was a reflection of who she had become. Every pillow, every frame, every book was chosen by her for her. She took a deep breath as she sipped tea, letting the courtroom drama replay in her mind. Daniel's face when the judge read her financials was unforgettable. But what lingered more was how she had felt, grounded, steady, proud. Memories began to drift in, the nights she'd waited up for him, the vacations he took without her, the subtle digs disguised as jokes. She had once believed she was lucky to have Daniel, but time and distance had unspooled the lie. She hadn't been lucky, she had been surviving. And now, she was thriving. A ping from her phone pulled her back. It was a message from her assistant. "New author manuscript approved. Ready for your review tomorrow." Emma smiled. Her future wasn't waiting. It was already happening. By the end of the week, news of the courtroom revelation had spread. A small publishing blog ran an article titled "Divorcing Powerhouse: The Quiet Rise of Ember and Quill Founder, Emma Hartford." What began as a niche feature was soon picked up by a larger outlet. Emma's inbox flooded with interview requests, partnership offers, and congratulatory messages from women who had followed her blog silently for years. Her story had gone public and people were paying attention. Daniel, meanwhile, received the article from a colleague with a snide caption, "You let this one get away." He stared at the screen, heart pounding. The Emma he had dismissed was now being lauded as a visionary. The contrast stung. He knew the power of media, how quickly stories shaped reputations. Emma wasn't just his ex-wife now. She was a public success. Emma hesitated before walking onto the set. It was her first live interview, and although she was confident in her work, being in the spotlight was new. The host smiled warmly as Emma took her seat. "Emma, your story has inspired thousands of women. What gave you the courage to build something after such personal devastation?" Emma smiled gently. "I stopped asking for permission. I stopped waiting for someone to tell me I was capable. The pain of being left behind became the fuel to create something just for me." The segment aired that night and quickly went viral. Viewers commented on her grace, her strength, her elegance. Daniel watched the clip alone in his office, a drink untouched beside him. For the first time, He realized the world saw her in a way he never had, worthy, radiant, and brilliant. Weeks later, Daniel sent Emma an invitation to dinner. No message, no explanation, just a time and place. Emma stared at it for a long moment. She knew what this was: curiosity, regret, a desperate attempt to reclaim something he never valued. She almost deleted the message, but then paused. Closure. Not for him, for herself. That evening, she arrived at the restaurant, wearing a fitted black dress and heels that clicked like punctuation marks. Daniel stood as she approached, clearly surprised she'd come. "You look amazing," he said. "I know," she replied simply, sitting down. The conversation that followed wasn't bitter, it was honest. Daniel apologized, haltingly. He admitted he'd been blind, self-absorbed, foolish. Emma nodded, but didn't offer comfort. She had no hate left, only truth. "You didn't break me," she said calmly. "You revealed me." As dessert arrived, Daniel leaned in. "I've changed. I see things now, differently. Maybe we could try again, just talk more often, reconnect." His tone was careful, almost pleading. Emma didn't flinch. She sipped her wine, watching him. "Daniel," she said slowly, "you're not seeing me. You're seeing the version of me that suits your regret. But I'm not here to make your guilt easier. I'm here to say goodbye properly." Daniel's face fell. He had expected pride, maybe even anger, but not this serenity. Emma reached for her purse, stood, and gave him a small smile. "Thank you for dinner, and for leaving me. You did both at the right time." She walked away, her head high, as Daniel sat motionless alone with the weight of the future he had thrown away. Emma returned to her office the next morning, refreshed. Her staff greeted her with enthusiasm, and her calendar was packed. There was a film producer interested in adapting one of her signed author's books. A major retail chain wanted Ember and Quill titles on their shelves. Her empire was built on revenge, but on resilience. That afternoon, she stood in the conference room, presenting a new initiative, a writing incubator for underrepresented voices. Her team listened, inspired. Emma felt something bloom inside her. This was her calling, lifting others, creating platforms, changing narratives. As she looked around at her growing company, she realized something. Her story wasn't a reaction to Daniel. It was an origin story born from pain, shaped by courage, and driven by purpose. The best chapters of her life were still unwritten, but she now held the pen. Emma sat across from a branding consultant who had been hired to help relaunch Ember and Quill's image following the viral media attention. The consultant smiled, excitedly displaying mock-ups of new logo designs and merchandising plans. "The public doesn't just see you as a publisher anymore," she said. "They see you as a symbol." Emma nodded thoughtfully. She had never set out to be a symbol, only to survive. But if her name now meant strength, then she would wear it like armor. As the consultant spoke, Emma's mind drifted to the early days, printing books in her tiny apartment, doing her own layouts, working through nights filled with coffee and rejection. No one had believed in her back then. No one but herself. That Namer and Quill had been born during one of her lowest nights, as she stared at a flickering candle and scribbled in her old journal. "From ashes to fire," she'd whispered. It wasn't just a company, it was her resurrection. Emma had no children of her own, but her team had become like a second family. Maya, her assistant editor, often stayed late just to help young authors polish their manuscripts. Jonah, the tech guy, built custom platforms for emerging voices. They believed in the mission of Mies, mission to give voice to the unheard. And now that the company was growing rapidly, Emma knew it was time to reward their faith. During a team meeting, she announced bonuses and shares in the company. Gasps filled the room, followed by applause and a few tears. Emma stood at the front of the glass-walled conference room, smiling as her team embraced one another. She realized then that this was her real legacy, not just books, but people. She wasn't just building a brand, she was building belonging. Daniel showed up at her office without an appointment. Emma was in the middle of reviewing galley proofs when her receptionist nervously stepped in. "He's in the lobby," she said. "Should I call security?" Emma thought for a moment before nodding. No, I'll speak to him. She rose, smoothing her blouse, and walked into the foyer like a queen into court. Daniel looked different, drawn, thinner, humbled. He rose when she entered, holding his hands in a gesture of surrender. I'm not here to make a scene, he said. I just wanted to say, I understand now, everything, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Emma listened, heart steady. There was no hatred left, only a cool distance. Regret, she replied, isn't a key that unlocks closed doors. It's only a mirror. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him framed in the glass reflection of a life he no longer belonged to. Among the manuscripts submitted to Ember and Quill, one caught Emma's eye. It was raw, emotional, and painfully honest, a memoir from a woman who had survived an emotionally abusive marriage. As Emma read, she felt as if the author had stolen pages from her own journal. The words hit deep, but instead of reopening wounds, they healed them. Emma called a meeting that afternoon. We're publishing this, she said, and it'll be our headliner for next quarter. The book launch was met with massive attention. Women across the country resonated with the story. Bookstores sold out. Talk shows called. Emma sat with the author at the release event, both of them tearful but proud. You didn't just write a book, Emma said, gripping her hand. You wrote freedom and lifting others. She found herself rising higher. Emma received an invitation to speak at a prestigious women's empowerment conference in D.C., the keynote slot. She stared at the email, heart fluttering. Her voice was being called beyond the page, no one to stages, into rooms where lives could change. She accepted. On the flight to D.C., she thought about how far she'd come. The woman who once couldn't order takeout without second-guessing herself was now headlining national events. But midway through the conference, a text interrupted her. Joy, Daniel hospitalized. Heart issue. Thought you should know. She stared at it for minutes. The past tugged, but her peace held firm. Emma went to the hospital not because she owed Daniel anything, but because she was human. She walked into his room quietly. Daniel looked pale and older, the oxygen tubing in his nose making him seem fragile for the first time. I didn't think you'd come, he said, voice hoarse. I didn't come for you, she replied gently. I came for closure. They spoke, not as lovers or enemies, but as two people who once shared a chapter. She didn't stay long. As she walked out, she felt no ache, no longing, just a surprising calm. Sometimes forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for her. Back at the office, Emma cleared a drawer in her desk filled with old journals and photos. From her marriage, one by one, she flipped through them. The wedding photo, the love notes written during better days. She didn't burn them. She boxed them. The past deserved acknowledgement, but not residency. She wrote herself a letter that day. I see you. I believe in you. I'm proud of you. She signed it, sealed it, and tucked it into her top drawer. A reminder that the woman she'd become had always been inside awaiting for permission that she no longer needed. During an in-depth interview for a documentary about women in publishing, the director asked Emma, "What would you say to the woman you used to be?" The camera rolled as silence filled the room. Emma looked away, eyes glistening. I'd say, thank you. Thank you for not giving up, for enduring, for being scared, but not quitting. You held on long enough for me to get here. She didn't cry often anymore, but that moment cracked her open. And when the tears came, they weren't of pain. They were gratitude. Emma launched the Ember Fellowship, that year, a grant and mentorship program for aspiring female authors from marginalized backgrounds. It was named not after her company, but after the little ember inside every woman waiting to reignite. The launch event filled with media, influencers, and young writers. Some starstruck just to be in Emma's presence. She stood at the podium, not just as a CEO, but as a survivor turned builder. You don't have to be whole to start, she said. You just have to believe that even your broken pieces are still worthy of light. Emma returned home that night to a quiet apartment, her awards and photographs lining the walls. She poured a glass of wine and stepped onto her balcony, the wind brushing her face like an old friend. Life had changed, but so had she. She no longer feared loneliness. She cherished solitude. As the city lights shimmered below her, she whispered, to herself, I am fireproof. Not because she'd never burned, but because she had learned how to rise from the ashes. And now, with the past behind and purpose ahead, she was unstoppable. The annual Ember and Quill Gala had become a celebrated literary event, drawing agents, publishers, authors, and press from across the country. Emma stood on stage in a deep emerald gown, giving her welcome speech beneath a chandelier that glittered like the success she had earned. But as she stepped down, she noticed him Daniel standing in the back, near the bar, in a crisp navy suit. He had an RSVP'd. He wasn't supposed to be here. Emma's heart tightened for a moment, but not from fear or longing. It was the shock of realizing how little space he now occupied in her emotional world. She walked over, calm and direct. This isn't your world anymore, she said quietly. Daniel looked around, the noise and brilliance of the room swallowing him. I just wanted to see it for myself, he murmured. Emma didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She turned and walked away, knowing some ghosts return not to haunt, but to remind you of how far you've come. Weeks later, Emma received a manila envelope at her office, addressed in Daniel's handwriting. Inside was a letter handwritten, raw, unpolished. It was an apology, but not a plea. He detailed how he had watched her rise and realized he had never truly known the woman he married. I clipped your wings while convincing you to be grateful. For the cage, he wrote, but you flew anyway. I see that now. Emma read it once, then again, slower. The words didn't sting. They didn't flatter. They simply closed the door with the click of truth. She placed the letter in her desk drawer, not to revisit, but to remember that healing doesn't always need witnesses, just honesty. It wasn't planned. It never is. Emma met Julian at a publishing conference in Seattle, an editor with storm gray eyes, a quiet voice, and an encyclopedic knowledge of poetry. Their conversations were slow, unforced. He didn't talk over her. He didn't need her to shrink to feel big. They exchanged numbers, but no promises. Back home, their messages deepened into nightly calls, shared manuscripts, inside jokes. Julian didn't chase her. He waited beside her. And for the first time in years, Emma felt the unfamiliar warmth of a connection not rooted in rescue but in resonance. She wasn't looking to be completed, but she welcomed someone who simply saw her whole. Despite all her success, Emma had moments of doubt. During a board meeting, she pitched a new imprint focused solely on young, first-time female writers. Some advisors pushed back. It's not profitable, one warned. They lack the Polish readers expect. Emma's jaw tensed. She knew that tone. She had once heard it every day from a man who thought her dreams were too fragile to matter. Emma sat still for a moment, then leaned forward. Neither was I profitable when I started, she said, but someone should have believed in me, so I'll believe in them. The room went silent, and then one by one, heads nodded. The motion passed. Resistance was familiar, but now, so was her fire. After a panel event in Chicago, a young woman approached Emma with trembling hands and watery eyes. I followed your journey, she said. I left an emotionally abusive relationship last year. Your story, it gave me the courage. Emma embraced her tightly. You saved yourself, she whispered. I just left the light on. Later that night, in her hotel room, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, overwhelmed with gratitude. She realized that her strength didn't just build a company, it had become a lighthouse for others lost at sea. She wasn't just publishing books. Anymore, she was publishing freedom. Emma's name was shortlisted for the National Book Advocate Awarding, honor given not for writing, but for transforming the industry. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the email. It wasn't about vanity. It was about validation. That all the sleepless nights, the rejections, the silent suffering had carved a legacy that would outlive her. As the news spread, calls came, pouring in. Emma sat in her office, surrounded by flowers and congratulations, but her thoughts drifted to her late mother, a woman who never saw her daughters rise. Emma whispered to the air, I hope you're proud, and for a moment, she felt the warmth of unseen hands applauding in the quiet. Emma found herself exhausted mentally and emotionally. She had poured herself into her work for years, and now her body was asking her to rest. At a doctor's suggestion, she took a month-long sabbatical. No emails, no interviews, just time to breathe. She traveled to Tuscany alone, journaling under olive trees and waking without an alarm. One morning, she walked through a local market, unrecognized, unhurried, and it hit her: success didn't need to be a race. Sometimes, strength was in stillness. She smiled to herself and bought fresh figs. Emma was learning to enjoy the life she'd built, not just build it. Julian joined her in Italy for the final week. They didn't talk about work. They walked cobbled streets, read old poetry books, and cooked dinner side by side. In a small villa, lit only by candles, Julian took her hand and said, "I don't need your spotlight. I just want to sit beside you while you shine." Emma felt tears well up, not because she was afraid, but because this was the first time love felt like a mirror, not a mask. She nodded, her fingers laced with his. In the quiet room, her heart spoke louder than ever. Back in the States, Emma returned to ember and quill, renewed. Her staff greeted her like royalty, but she waved off the formality. "I missed you all," she said. They launched a new imprint she'd fought for, and within weeks, it produced a best-selling debut novel. Emma walked the halls of her office like a woman who had reclaimed not just her time, but her joy. She didn't rush meetings or multitask. Lunches. She listened deeply, laughed more, and left earlier. The empire was still hers, but now so was her life. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, Emma sat by the window of her apartment, wrapped in a soft sweater, drinking cocoa. There was no agenda, no deadlines, just the soft patter of rain, and the warmth of knowing she had become everything she once thought she needed someone else to provide. Her phone buzzed a message from Julian: "Dinner later. Your favorite place. Just us." She smiled and replied, "Perfect." For the first time in her life, Emma felt full, not because of applause or validation, or even love from someone else, but because she had learned to love the one person who had never left her, herself. Content. The creases at her eyes weren't flaws, but bookmarks of laughter, nights spent creating, and tears cried in strength. For the first time, Emma didn't criticize herself. She studied her reflection with reverence. She remembered a time when Daniel's comments made her shrink, when a glance in the mirror made her doubt her worth. But now, she saw someone who had walked through fire, barefoot, and kept going. Her beauty wasn't in the way she looked. It was in the way she had rebuilt herself, brick by brick, with dignity, silence, and unshakable courage. Emma and Julian hosted a dinner party for friends, authors, and close colleagues. It wasn't for business. It was for connection. The long dining table was lit by flickering candles and filled with hearty laughter, slow jazz, and good food. Emma watched her guests enjoy themselves, the sound of clinking glasses and warm conversation surrounding her like a symphony of joy. For years, she had attended events only to network or prove herself. But tonight was different. Tonight, she belonged in every way. When Julian brushed her hand gently, she smiled without needing to ask if this was real. It was. She was no longer just living. She was thriving. Out of the blue, Emma received an invitation to Daniel's wedding. She laughed softly when she read it, not from mockery, but from surprise. He was marrying a woman younger than both of them, someone likely unfamiliar with who he used to be. Emma considered attending, but ultimately chose not to. Not out of pettiness, but peace. She mailed a simple gift, a framed quote that read, "2. Love is to grow, and to grow is to let go." There was no malice, no sarcasm, only truth. Some ties are not broken by anger. They are dissolved by healing. Emma launched a mentorship program that paired industry veterans with new female writers. She personally mentored a young Nigerian novelist named Amina, whose vivid prose and powerful voice reminded Emma of her own early days. Amina often struggled with confidence, and Emma became the lighthouse she once needed herself. During a late-night Zoom call, Amina tearfully confessed, "Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough." Emma leaned in, voice soft but firm. "You are already more than enough. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep showing up. That night, Emma realized that legacy wasn't what you leave behind. It was what you build into others. One day, while reviewing drafts in her sunlit office, Emma received a call from a university dean. They wanted to name a literary lecture series after her. "You've changed the landscape," the dean said. "We want future writers to study your journey." Emma sat back in her chair, stunned. Her life had gone from being invisible to being studied. As she walked the campus weeks later for the ceremony, past rows of students with pens and open notebooks, she felt something deeper than success. She felt purpose. What had started as survival had become a movement. A life that once begged for direction had now become a map. Emma finally purchased a cottage. She had always dreamed of secluded near the coast, with a private garden and a study overlooking the sea. It became her sanctuary. On weekends, she'd retreat there to write, cook, and simply be. No deadlines, no meetings. Just space to exist as Emma, not the CEO, not the public figure, but simply a woman who loved words and silence. She decorated it slowly, adding touches of her travels, letters from readers, and books that shaped her. In that cottage, she wrote not for profit, but for herself. It was there, in that sacred space, that she finally penned her own memoir, titled Ashes to Ember. Emma's memoir was a quiet revolution. It told the story behind the press releases, the heartbreak, the rebuilding, the internal battles. It wasn't bitter, it was brave. And readers devoured it. Within weeks, it topped bestseller lists and was optioned for a film. Julian held her hand at the launch, watching as women of all ages lined up for signed copies. Some cried, some brought their daughters. One whispered, "You saved my life." Emma smiled through tears. Her pain had not been wasted. It had become fuel for healing for others, and finally, for herself. On a warm autumn evening, Julian proposed not with fireworks or fanfare, but with a handwritten letter and a quiet question under the stars. "Not because I want to change you," he said, "but because I want to walk beside you while you keep changing the world." Emma said yes, not because she needed a partner to feel whole, but because she wanted one who honored her wholeness. Their wedding was intimate, surrounded by the people they'd grown with. No spectacle, just sincerity. She didn't marry to be rescued. She married to be cherished. Marriage this time was different. There were no power struggles, no walking on eggshells. Julian loved her mind as much as her heart. They respected each other's silence as much as their speech. On quiet mornings, they sipped coffee and read manuscripts together. On loud ones, they debated ideas with passion and laughter. Emma had learned that love wasn't about being saved, it was about being seen. And in Julian's gaze, she saw her fullest self reflected back. Not just the fire, but the warmth, the light, and the soft ash she once rose from. Years later, Emma stood at the front of a crowded auditorium, delivering a commencement address to a sea of young graduates. She looked out at them, their eyes filled with hope, uncertainty, and hunger for purpose. "Don't let someone else's disbelief write your story," she said. "You are more powerful than you think. Even in the silence, your voice matters." As the crowd rose in applause, Emma felt no need to prove anything anymore. Her life, once fractured, had become a masterpiece, crafted from courage, loss, and the audacity to keep going. And now, as the applause thundered and flashbulbs popped, Emma smiled not for the cameras, but for the girl who once thought she'd never be enough. She had become everything she needed, and more.